All right, it started.
Thank you. So we'll call our
If I turn the volume.
Budget and Finance Committee meeting to order at 6:30 p.m.
Thank
6:30 p.m. Do you want to vote on the minutes, Tim?
Motion to approve.
I'll second that. It's
Roll call.
roll call vote. Tim? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Dennis? Yes. So we get that. Tim? Yes. Dennis? Then you want to do what you usually do with the order
Yeah.
FY7?
Motion to continue to our next meeting.
Continue to next meeting. That's Tim. Aye. Yes. All-
Yes.
Roll call vote. Yes. Tim. Dennis. Yes. 2-0. And employee contractual buyouts FY 20053. Do you have any questions?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve, and there's a second. Roll call vote. Tim.
Yes.
Dennis. Yes. Tim and Dennis. Yes. 2-0. Order FY 20054 transfer order bill, prior year bill.
Motion to approve.
Okay, and I'll second. Roll call vote. Tim.
Yes.
Dennis, yes. 2-0. And then FY 20055, the capital appropriations.
Motion to approve.
I'll second that. Roll call vote. Tim.
Yes.
Dennis, yes. 2-0. So that's done. So does the Budget and Finance Committee have a quorum yet to call your meeting to order?
We do.
Okay.
So I will call the Bridgewater Finance Committee to order at 6:32, and this is Nathan Schofield.
Hi, Nathan. Hi. So unless you have any other business you got to talk about, we can go right to the FY 20 and 21 budgets unless you guys have other stuff to do.
No, I think we are good.
You're good, right? So
Yep.
The purpose of this joint meeting, really, we'll probably have a few more of these, I'm sure, as I believe next Tuesday night, a week from tonight, the town council will get the full FY 21 budget from the town manager through the finance director. And so we wanted to just continue what we talked about at our last meeting, is to get an update on where we stand with 2020 with a month and a half to go. And then some of his projected and projected best, moderate, and worst case scenarios going into 2021 on the revenue side. So again, we all know this is still a fluid situation. So I guess I can turn it over to the town manager and/or the town finance director to begin your presentation. We'll start with the FY 20 budget. We all got some information in the emails today. Hopefully you have that stuff to go along with tonight. Or are you going to put it on the screen? I don't know. I'll turn it over to Mike and Tony. Yeah.
So, thanks, Dennis. I guess I let Tony, hopefully he can share the screen. But just by way of sort of introduction, I think what we're doing is taking a very close and careful look at 2020, the remaining weeks of FY 2020. And as Tony will explain in more detail, we are using a lot of the analysis and a lot of the matrices that Tony's developed to be able to track 2020 and use that to try our best to project 2021. So why don't I let Tony go through 2020, and then we can go over any questions or really dig into it as you want.
Okay. So first, let me check. Thank you, Michael. Let me check. Can you see the screen?
I can
Yes.
see it, yes. Yeah.
Okay. So let me preface the information I'm going to present. So there's the reason we wanted to create a more comprehensive month-end budgeting document, I mean, stating the obvious is we're faced with uncharted territory, right? So first and foremost, our desire to get this up and running was so that we knew with what we hoped would a high degree of confidence that we could get through FY20 with enough cash to pay the bills and some reserves as a result of operations, and we wouldn't be looking at a negative free cash situation. So it's the good news is we anticipate that to be the case. The numbers that are coming in, although we are seeing some down ticking in some of the receipt categories, and we will see some significant downturn in the fourth quarter, we are in good position now, and whatever happens between now and the end of the year should.
Tony, the fiscal fourth quarter?
That's correct, sir.
Thank you.
That should allow us to end up in a positive cash and a positive fund balance with a nominal amount of free cash, and I mean nominal. So that was the first thing we wanted to do to make sure we didn't have to go out and do some borrowing, tax anticipation notes just to pay our bills as we end the fiscal year. But again, we wanted to know more than that. We wanted to make sure that we had at least a break-even proposition for the fiscal year. So there's the good news there. The other thing we wanted to do was set in place the metrics and the measurements that we want to have in place to inform us as to what's really happening. We know things are happening in the economy. We know what the unemployment rate is. We know folks are not going to be back to dinner. We know ball games. I won't go down the list. We all know what is going to be different for the next several months, if not many months. But we need to know how that's impacting the collections that drive our revenue. And the ones we have control of is typically where I focus. So as we go through this, I'll highlight the ones that we focus on to see and to show you that we have a metric that we can monitor and we can be aware weekly where we stand, and also at a higher level monthly where we stand. And I call it process metrics and result metrics. So result metrics are you collected $10 million last month. A process metrics, motor vehicle excise and real estate, let's say for instance, are you collecting at the same pace compared to last year, or is there a slow pay going on? Is there something happening with the pay habits of the residents and the taxpayers in Bridgewater that would give us forewarning that things could be getting worse? So I'm planning for the end of June FY21 now. So my thought process in designing a number of these, and we have some tweaking to go, is to be as forward-looking as we can by monitoring the trends as they are measured and how things unfold. So as all these documents was an attempt to do that. So I realize there's a lot of information. I'm going to try to highlight what I think are the process metrics, the ones that we're really going to be monitoring. The result metrics are more like your budget to actuals, but they're going to have a little bit more information, like the projections for the rest of the year, and we'll be doing that as we go into FY21. We can no longer just go month to month and just wait till 3/4 of the year to determine how we're doing. So we will constantly be doing projections in our budget to actuals each and every month going forward for the foreseeable future. And then the metrics, as I start to point to them, will be the weekly numbers that we can look at to see if we're seeing some signs of how the local economy and the local unemployment are impacting our ability to collect and to run the operation. Make sense?
Yep, good.
Okay, so I'll move along. So the critical dates is just a document that the town manager and I needs to show we're looking for weekly updates. And the monthly updates are in fact a full-blown financial forecast. As you can see, 430 has now been completed, and that's what we're going to talk about today. If you took a look at this, you can see some of the impact of the adoption of the ordinance that the council made a few weeks ago that allowed to push some of the due dates of our motor vehicle excise and our property tax bills out. That will have an impact, and that will be an underlying piece of the conversation as to why we may not be collecting what we typically collect as compared to this year and last. So just keep that in mind. So that's all I was going to cover there, unless there are any questions.
So this is Kathy. I just have a question.
This is a high-level cash forecast, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail except for to highlight that we anticipate $1.2 million in cash at the end of the fiscal year. And
Tony,
yes,
this is Kathy. So I just had a question on the prior slide.
sure.
So when will we see the detailed operating budget for 2021 and the capital plan?
I'll let Michael speak to the 21. Budget.
So, yep, so you will see the 21 budget probably not before Tuesday. The reason being that we're trying to collect as much information from as many different sources to develop a budget that probably will be changed before it gets voted, but I want to give you the most current figures that we possibly can on Tuesday. The capital, we submitted a we call it first round or a request for capital funding, and that's in front of the council now. So that's on their agenda, and I think you're seeing. I don't know if the finance committee saw that last night or not, but
We did, but we deferred it because we had a lot of questions.
All right. Well,
And to answer that, that's why they received today some detail on that. They all should have received a detailed document that explains each of the projects.
I did not see that.
That was sent to Josh today.
okay. So
We
hopefully
got revenues, we got this, I don't remember.
I can't speak to that. I'd have Josh speak to that.
hopefully you'll see that soon. But
Okay.
short answer on that is you'll see we took capital spending for FY 20/21, and instead of presenting the whole list, we cut back substantially down to the bare minimum items that were pretty, essentially must-haves for a variety of reasons. But that was the list that we cut back. So the remaining plan we'll get to you certainly in short order. But the most pressing items are in front of the council now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, shall I continue?
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure there wasn't any questions. I can't see who might be.
I can't see everybody either because the presentation. So if somebody wants to speak, just speak
so
up.
That's why I paused. Thank you, sir.
Tim.
So high level, $1.2 million, and as you can see,
So
we've
Tony,
indicated where we
1.2
feel we're gonna,
Tony,
yes.
1.2, expect what you expect to be certified as free cash? Or is that just kind of money in the bank and there's a whole different formula that the state goes through to get to quote unquote free cash?
Well, let me separate the two things. What I'm talking about is our cash position, cash in the bank in order to pay bills, liquidity. I'll get to our fund balance and our free cash estimate in a moment. So this just says by the end of the year, we don't have to borrow short term like other municipalities may have to in order to pay their payroll, in order to pay their school assessments, in order to pay. We will have a positive cash balance in the bank, and that's all this speaks to. And then I'll cover the actual fund balance and estimated free cash in a moment. Okay, So if no one has any questions as to what's being presented here, because everyone did get a copy of the document, I'll move on, but I'll open it to any questions versus going through the document verbatim.
Okay. Give me a minute.
So while you're thinking, I'll say the left side of this document speaks to results metrics. You know, are we going to collect the money that we budgeted, right? So everything on the left-hand side of this property tax cherry sheet, local receipts, transfers, salaries, wages and benefits, expenses, debt service and transfers, we're measuring all of that against budget, okay? And whether or not we're going to have we anticipate a budget shortfall or a budget surplus. So in the degree of certainty, moderate, high, 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 moderate, high, high, that's in relationship to budget. Then the descriptive just explains how we got to that degree of certainty. To the right is what we call the process metric. And what we're saying is, let's do a comparison for personal property and real estate, the percent collected as of 4/30/20 and 4/30/19, and let's see how we're comparing from last year to this year. And the variance in personal property is 1.7 to the plus. We as I mentioned, I think last time, to this group, 5 vendors account for, and correct me, we're in the close to 90%, 90+% of our personal property. Those are utilities vendors. The real estate's a different animal, as you can see. Part of what's driving the -2% as compared to last year is we've pushed the due date to 6/29. As long as the taxes are paid prior to or on 6/29, there will be no penalty and interest charged to the taxpayer. So that is going to drive that number. The question is, will we get those payments before 6/29, or they flow over or spill over, if you will, into FY21? All right, so we're being very conservative in the area of real estate collections. And because we're conservative in my number as it relates to the 1.2 million, we're feeling moderate about the likelihood of that occurring. Just jumping down the motor vehicle excise commitment 1 and 2, that's a metric we're using. We're starting to look at collection days. That's the day the bill was mailed to the due date and the pay date. Example, bills mailed on 4/1. If it was due on 4/15 and someone paid on 4/2, then they paid 14 days prior to the due date. If they pay 30 days, and let's go into May 15th, and the 30 days passed, then it's 30 days collection days. So that's a way of comparing apples to apples from one year to the next, because motor vehicle commitments do not go out the exact same date every year. And so you can't compare dates, you need to compare this metric, which allows you to compare apples to apples. As you can see, motor vehicle commitment 1, we're down 0.9% as compared to last year in the same collection days, and motor vehicle 2, we're down 5.6%. Those are things that we're going to be watching closely. Now we move to, I think where you were, Tim, is what's really the calculation, which is close to the cash number on the prior document, which is 1.2. How do we get to our projected ending undesignated fund balance? This is the exercise. I won't go into detail. This is a DOR requirement for the exercise of getting to the bottom of 1.17. So that's our starting point if we closed our books today, as of 4/30, excuse me. This is how you calculate your free cash, or on the side of the school, they call it their E&D. In an enterprise fund, you call it your retained earnings. In the business world, you call it retained earnings. You take your undesignated fund balance, you subtract all the allowances that you have sitting in reserve for unfunded, for unsecured liabilities, plus potential abatements and exemptions. You go out to all your other funds to determine if you have some deficits. Those top 4 deficits, overdrawn accounts here, are actuals as of 4/30. The recreation revolving is less than the 100,000, but we're anticipating 100,000 because a lot of the activities that fund that particular part of the operation are not taking place. So no revenue is being collected. So we're anticipating 100. So you take the one.
Tony,
Yes, sir.
is that a combination of golf course and youth sports activities?
There's no golf course number in
No
there.
golf course, so it's youth sports activities?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So the 1171 less 820 less 172 says a nominal free cash certified amount of about $178,000. Now again,
And that's based on today's numbers, correct?
that is correct.
So the likelihood of that getting any worse is not,
Is low.
is very, very low. That can really only improve.
That's correct. Going back to the degree of certainty that I have for the cash, that degree of certainty would also apply to the free cash number. That's correct.
Tony, could you explain that allowance for abatements and exemptions and what that is and where that number comes from again?
So every year we're required to raise an amount on the recap. It's within the finance director and town manager's jurisdiction to determine what we need to put aside for exemptions. So there are a number of different exemptions that are available to the taxpayer. So let's just say a veteran's exemption. And the state pays a portion of the exemption. You'll see on our cherry sheet or some of our revenue, you'll see, and I won't speak to it now, but you'll get some money from the state and they kind of match what we're gonna provide a veteran for an exemption to offset their tax bill. It's an adjustment to the tax bill approved by the Board of Assessors. Abatements, on the other hand, is when someone challenges an assessed value of their property and they take that challenge formally through a formalized process to the Board of Assessors, and they ask for an abatement, meaning they're asking for their valuation of their property to be looked at, and typically they're not looking for the valuation to go up, they're typically looking for the valuation to go down, which means in turn that their tax bill would go down. So there's a process that takes place as it relates to the abatements. If the Board of Assessors were to deny an abatement, the individual taxpayer has a right to file with the appellate tax board at the state and be heard in front of the appellate tax board. So those are the two processes that make up a portion of that allowance for abatements and exemption. There's another portion that we have to keep in reserves, and that's for property taxes, because property taxes are unsecured. So our outstanding receivable balance for property taxes, because it's unsecured, we need to maintain an amount equal to that in the allowances for abatements and exemptions. That's why the collections and the due diligence on collecting property taxes using the deputy collector and using third-party collection agencies is critical, because the lower we can get that number, the less we need to reserve. We also have a few properties in the town that are unsecured. There's a lease property out on 24 that the state owns, where we collect real estate taxes and some property taxes from the, and I'll just refer to the name, let's say Burger King. However, back in 2008, when the party that was leasing that property from the state, who was then in turn leasing it to Burger King, when they went under, we lost all recourse except for bankruptcy court to recover those funds due that were unpaid. So we have to make sure that that group of real estate taxpayers, what we have in receivables for them, matched with allowances for abatements and exemptions. That whole calculation, plus every year an analysis as to what we have is done in order to ensure that we have the appropriate amount sitting in the allowances for abatements and exemptions. Now, when I first came on board, I think we had about 1.1, 1.2 million. We have that moved down as of 4/30 to 820, partly because some allowances for abatements and exemptions have been processed through it, and also because we have released in a prior period, last fiscal year, monies from there because we no longer felt we needed to carry the balance that we had on the books. That is really in a nutshell what the allowances for abatements and exemptions are.
So Tony, if I can follow up on that. Someone comes to the Board of Assessors and says, you know, you valued my house at $350,000 and you said I had a finished basement. I really don't. Come in and look. They invite the Board of Assessors in. They look around. Basement's definitely unfinished. The value of the house then is reset to reflect an appropriate unfinished rather than finished basement. That property tax bill goes down and we lose quote unquote that money in that fiscal year. However, it's still part of the levy limit still is what it is. And so that money that got abated on the one taxpayer's bill is then essentially spread over every other taxpayer the next year to say we still need to raise 2.5%. It doesn't go away. It's just a 1-year blip, right?
That's correct. That's exactly it. Yes.
Thanks. Just wanted to make the point for people who may not know that.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up to that question though. So I understand that principle well, but so if it's is it a one-time abatement or is it I think Tim, your example was a change in the assessment, which would be 1 year and then the next year would catch up. But are there situations where year after year property owners come in and say, you know, you're taxing me too high and it's reduced?
I can't say there's the Board of Assessors does a great job. The assessor does a great job, and no, we don't see patterns where we're consistently overvaluing the same property year after year. I mean, there's a number of parcels that are valued, so there's a margin for error along the way. Does that answer your question, Bill?
Yes, it does. And then later on in this presentation, do you go into your growth projections as well? I didn't see material before the meeting.
Yes, there's another document that will go gross projections for FY21.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that number 820, is that a conservative number? Is that a number that we potentially have some room to reduce?
I have the assessor and I analyze that every single month. We are slowly moving that number down. But again, I have at one time, let's say $400,000 of unsecured personal property and unsecured real estate. So you can take 400,000 right off the top. So
Tony,
yes.
taxes, the cases that, you know, go to tax court or whatever can linger for years and years, and you have to hold that through the duration of the case, correct?
Yes, and I've gotten less and less conservative and my conservative nature has nothing to do with just being conservative for the sake of being conservative. I've been conservative until I saw that we had our allowances for abatements process under control. We didn't have any ATB cases, is what Mr. Fitzgibbons is referring to, sitting out at the appellate tax board, because at one point in time we had $150,000 to $200,000 sitting. Okay, so this time, and I don't be sitting out. So in the fall, that's the internet connection.
You're fading in and out a little bit.
I'm having all of a sudden our location. How about now?
That's better. It's better.
Okay, all right. in the fall, we will review this as we do every fall and determine what we're going to release. It's considered a one-time revenue. So typically, when we have released it, we've used it for one-time expenditures.
Do we know what that number was last year when we did our free cash calculation?
I can look it up. I mean, I'm in the middle of a presentation. I can't.
Yeah, no, I didn't know if you sort of knew it.
Well, I don't want to misspeak. I can tell you roughly it was about 1.1, 1.15. But
Thank you.
pull up the document. So does that cover all that? Everyone good with everything so far? Thank you. So here's where I hoped you were able to spend some time looking at the documents. There's a little training component in here. I want to make sure the languaging that I'm using is something, and I don't mean to be condescending in any way. I just want to make sure that the languaging I'm using makes sense to you, and I want to point to the meat of what we're looking at. And I did refer to that back on one of the first pages, the cash flow projection, because a couple of the two major metrics that we're measuring were displayed. But this is the basis of it, okay? So in essence, we're comparing what our commitment one, which is the largest commitment that the town issues each February and or March. And you can see in FY19, it was a $2.9 million commitment. In FY20, it was a $3 million commitment. So on the face, that's a good thing, right? We have an increase. What we are trying to do is now pay attention to our collections. So I bring your attention back to that first document where I said we are moderately, or we have a high degree of certainty or moderate degree of certainty. This is how we get there, especially for the motor vehicle excise, which was $4 million of our roughly $6.2 million worth of collections for local receipts. That's why I spend a lot of time on it, because that's the only thing we truly have full control over and full awareness of if we're willing to do the analytics. So the dollars collected and the collection days, and then the percent collected is what we're going to compare for each one of these commitments, which I showed you on the other document. And as of 4/30 FY20, here, 4/30 FY20, we had collected 85.2% of our commitment one. And in FY19, it was 86.1, a nominal difference. Down below, the key explains the definitions of as of date, the reporting date, collection days, the number of days from the as of date as compared to the due date, and percent collected is just that percent of the commitment collected. And the context, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but in fact, it goes back to my earlier point. We need to be comparing apples and oranges to see if the taxpayer's ability to pay is changed significantly over the next 30, 60, and 90 days. So that's what we have in this document. That's something we issue weekly internally, and we'll issue monthly as part of this package. So we also have one for commitment 2. And we just got the commitment 3 from the Registry of Motor Vehicles, and we will be setting up a tracking metric for commitment 3. So that's how we look inside the numbers to see what's going on, from what's being committed and what's being committed and then what's being collected. One's a cash flow and one's a direct result of people not buying vehicles. So those are the two components that we can look at when we're looking at our motor vehicle excise tax. Any questions on that? Do I need to go into further detail?
I just have a question about this is Kathy again. So on both of those pages, you have this sort of, as of the reporting, here's where we are, and if the trend were to continue.
Mhm.
So are those shortfalls, because they're both a little bit of a shortfall, right? Are both of those included in the other numbers that you already talked about?
Yes, it's how I arrived at my estimates for collections.
Perfect,
Yes,
thank you.
there's a correlation. And here's another, yes,
Tony, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, okay. Did you say earlier that we're going to get this information?
This whole packet was issued through your, through Josh, Mr. McGraw. You should have gotten that issued today. To you.
He should have gotten it?
He should have issued it to you today.
So, yeah, I sent it probably around, checking to make sure everybody got it. But yeah, I sent that at 2 o'clock today.
What, did you send it via email?
Yes.
Okay, I don't think I received it, but I'll check.
Okay, I can resend it to you, Bob.
Okay.
So then you can see what flowed to page 1. This report here is really your budget to actual, except at an executive summary level, because we have the projected 20 budget. We had what we had collected through 3/31. We have now the actuals because April closed, and then you can see May, June, and the year-to-date projected. So you can see what's driving our estimated free cash number down, is driving our cash number down, is the conservative number that I'm using for property tax collection. And Mr. Gallagher asked the question, is that conservative, and do I feel that the number would likely be greater than less? And the answer was yes, and that's why. That gives us room. The cherry sheet numbers, no 9C cuts. We're going to get our cherry sheet, which refers to the state aid, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, referred to as the cherry sheet. And the local receipts, as you can see, we anticipate a surplus there. As I stated a few minutes ago, it's like, this is the group of revenue. This is the revenue stream that we can control in order to manage whether we have free cash or we don't have free cash, whether we put money in our stabilization or whether we don't put money in our stabilization, whether we can fund capital or whether we can't fund capital. So as you can see, I anticipate us at 121.5% above our local receipt estimate. And in this scenario, local receipts are going to be what allows us to get to that break-even plus point, because they are offsetting the potential deficit in our collections for property tax.
Tony, quick question on the local receipts.
Mhm.
What portion of that is the wiring job at BSU?
Okay, so there's two numbers for permits is what Mr. Wood is referring to. One of the permits was, and it is on another screen, so let me just, if I'm wrong, I'll correct myself, in the $180,000 range. And another one was for a Elm Street project. Now the one for BSU, what I would highlight there, which has helped that number, and the other one was for Elm Street. About 220 is a combined total of those. Typically, a major project where you bring revenue in under licenses and permits, and the permits I'm referring to are building permits, wiring permits, building permits, plumbing permits. There's a correlation between a permit and then a subsequent year's new growth. Okay, because if someone was to spend $180,000 on rewiring a home, and then they could remodel the home and sell the home, then in fact, when you went to assess that property, you would be picking up additional value that would then roll into your new growth. That's the typical stream of the major permitting revenue stream. A portion of it flows into new growth, which becomes a real estate property tax. In this case, the BSU we do not tax that institution. So therefore, there's no tax revenue that equates to this permit whatsoever. There's no correlation, is my point. On the Elm Street, there is a correlation, but we set up the district incentive financing in order to pay for the project on Elm Street and to pay for the work on the roads and the access ways and all the things that are funding the development of that road. That revenue that new growth goes into a special fund in order to fund the debt service on that. That was a very wise mechanism that the town used in order to get that $6+ million project underway, which in fact then enticed developments to move to that particular area in the town, that district in the town. Oh, I just had a PDF malfunction. I'm going to have to shut it and open it back up. Apologize for that.
While you do that, Tony, I'll follow up. So I don't remember the number myself either. It doesn't matter. But it's unlikely that BSU is going to do a similar project next year. So we're seeing an increase in local receipts through the mechanism today because BSU did that project, but that won't repeat next year.
It's a one-time revenue, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
There's always something that comes up with its one time. There's usually something that comes up as one-time revenue when it comes to local receipts, usually.
Yes, there is.
Usually. Not all the time, but usually.
No, I don't disagree. It's just that in this case, it's going to help us survive the end of this fiscal year. But for next fiscal year, that amount of money is not going to repeat.
But something else will come up.
I can't budget something else.
But it just might come in, you know.
It may.
But
So
no, I appreciate the presentation on how we're getting out of fiscal. We're almost into 45 minutes and we're on page 9.
as I said, I am at your service.
I'm all for asking questions. Everybody needs to get up to date, but the bottom line is we're going to get out of fiscal 20. We're going to get out of fiscal 20 with a positive note. We're not going to, everyone's going to get paid. No one's going to get laid off. All our bills will be paid. We're probably not going to get as much free cash in July or September as we normally would, but I think it's important that he shows us the trend ending these last 3 months, which is very, very important. So,
Yeah.
the trends are scary. The trends are very, very scary. So, that's what I wanted. I got the fiscal 21, projection, and it's a very good analysis on what could happen to this town later this year.
Would you like to jump to that? And this is your meeting. I'm here to serve
No,
you.
I want everyone I want you to go through the slides, but I just want everybody aware, I don't mind being here until midnight. But I think the more important presentation tonight for us, I think, should be the fiscal 21 budget, because we got a month and a half to go in fiscal 20, and we're going to make it, as you've said, and it's well analyzed. So I think people should ask their questions. That's very important.
So I serve at your pleasure. You let me know what you want to do.
Continue. Did you get just continue, but I just want people to be aware of what page number we're on and how many more pages we have to go.
No, there's a group of pages that I'm just going to say, this is the budget to actual with projections. This is a new document right here. I know I've been asked to compare quarter to quarter. I know I've been asked to put descriptives in and to give some commentary. So all this is a slice of your budget to actual for revenue, looking at your major local receipt categories.
Hey, Tony,
Is that back on the screen?
you got a weird screen
Yeah.
for I think most of us.
I just
It's
got
a
one white
sliver.
line in the middle.
Yeah, you might unshare and share it again.
There you go. Now I can see everybody.
I had a Xfinity guy driving around our parking lot today, and I have a feeling he was here for a reason. I apologize. How about now? Can you see it?
Yeah, that's
There you go.
back. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
see
you.
it.
Thank you, guys. So that's what this document is. This is just a slice of property tax, cherry sheet, local receipts, OFS. This is the local receipt slice. And it gives you an opportunity to see the drivers and to get some commentary and answer some of the questions. I think, Bill alluded to licenses and permits. In this document is 283,000 was the number for BSU and for Elm Street. That's where I think your question was coming from, sir. All right. In this license and permit number, I just pull out the building. So what you're going to see inside of here are the ones that are really what drive up and down our local receipts. Okay. As you can, and that's really all I want to cover here. So it's something you can look at, and then as we go forward, please feel free to ask any questions that we have. Then we get to the expenditures. These pages, all of this is what you've normally gotten in the past, budget to actual for expenses, except for we have projections in there for May and for June, because we have to be forward thinking. And it does have a general commentary at the very top. I won't go through this. This is a typical report you get, but it spells out where our surplus in the area of expenditures will be. So when you look at that part of the report, it's no different than the budget actual you would normally get at the end of every month, except that we're projected. We're also going to be tracking health insurance because we know the economy is such that we could have an employee who's on their family's health insurance, and because of when unemployment starts to drive upwards, we know there can be a change in this benefit, and where people have a qualifying event and they could jump on the town's health benefit. And if you add one family plan, you're adding $14,000 worth of cost. So if you had 10 individuals take on a family plan as a result of a partner getting laid off, that's, $140,000. So we're tracking that going forward.
This is Kathy again. Sorry, I do have a couple of questions on the details, but so on the, it was on page 19 on the streetlights. Is that 100,000 that we're over there? Is that what's in that capital line item that we looked at last night?
No, they don't, there's not a correlation there. If I can,
So why are we that high over budget?
because we haven't made we went into a purchase agreement with a solar company, in that the town of Bridgewater purchases energy from a solar field, and then we get energy credits. So what you're seeing there is a timing. So one of the funding mechanisms at the end of the year is to move the energy credits, which are required to be kept in a special fund, into the general fund to offset this deficit. We do that once a year.
So we're not really that over budget, it's just the way that it's reflected?
Yes, it's just how we have to do it. Instead of making a transfer every month, which would be extremely time consuming, we do it once a year to offset that deficit. Now, going forward, that's not going to be an issue in this line at all. There'll be a significant savings in this line item because we will have the LED lights. So therefore, the expenditures hitting that account are going to be reduced significantly. And then what we'll be looking at is what we need to do with our energy credits and how we're going to make use of them. But that's just a management issue, and we'll find an appropriate way to benefit from those.
Okay, and then I just had one other one that I'd like to talk about is under the library on page 21. I know we said at a prior meeting that we were really trying to look at the expenses and make sure that we were only doing necessary things.
Mhm.
But it looks like under library supplies and books and periodicals,
Mhm.
we are like $30,000 over budget.
Mhm.
And a lot of that spending is happening in April, May, and June.
So the total overall surplus in that department will be $30,000.
Right.
I will say that these aren't discretionary. We had a new library director came on board, and the library director saw some major deficiencies and also saw that some charges needed to find their way to the general fund because our grants funds were running low, and therefore we needed to make sure we accounted for it properly. So let's call it an adjustment and priority spending. Because that's the decision that management has made.
I kind of agree that that's kind of a big overage on a line item, and I'm sure as far as books and periodicals go, you know, when you give someone $50,000 and then, you know, they're already over. I don't know what period of the year they went over, but
It's all future spend.
yeah.
You're planning to spend
let me-
$23,000 in June.
Let me be real specific here. Obligations that need to be made that were being made against the fund where we do not have the funds. I can't speak to the prior and how it was accounted for by a prior administrator, but this is a proper account for it. It's an adjustment that's being made and it needs to be made. It's not a discretionary overspending in a line item.
Okay, I'm sure we'll get an explanation when we have to transfer money to balance the account, or we wouldn't have to do that because the bottom line will be fine, right?
That's correct. It's going to go from salaries to expenses.
Yeah.
So part of that, just for the benefit of everybody, there are minimum requirements. The state has minimum requirements in order to continue to qualify for state funding through the Board of Library Commissioners. So one of those required line items is books and periodicals. So that's part of the reason that you see that.
Yeah, but did the prior director explain that when they presented their budget last year? Did they say, hey, look, I'm not going to I could lose certification if I only get $50,000? Or
Yeah, I think that was basically under budgeted because there was an reliance on gift money to fund some of that. So the state requirement actually is specific to the books and periodical line. So,
okay.
but when we do, we can go through that and get more information on that certainly.
So essentially, we're overspending X $1,000 to maintain a grant, state grants of X plus thousand.
That's correct.
Okay, that's good.
And that brings us to the end of the document. That's it. That wasn't so bad, Dennis, was it?
You got better.
Be patient.
Tony, you going to mention golf tonight also? We talked about it last night.
There's no golf. They just started, Bill. They got like $20.
I know.
They got $20.
I know, and there's a huge divot in the budget, so we need to talk about it at some point.
Well, I'll turn it over to Michael to give the context of the 21, and then I can pull up the revenue scenarios. And that's all I had. Michael?
Yep. Thanks, Tony. So the context of 21, obviously, as I've explained to the department heads, it's a little bit like trying to budget with quicksand because there are no numbers. I think, as everybody knows, many cities and towns have pushed out their town meetings. Those that have town meeting form of government have pushed out town meetings to towards the middle of and end of June, which allows them actually a little more time. It allows them the flexibility of a little more time with which to get some more certain figures. In a minute, Tony's going to show you some of the
Raise your hand. See this?
revenue.
You go ahead.
Tony's going to look at some of
Raise
the
your hand if
revenue
you want to say something. That's all.
benchmarks that we've established, and he showed you already some of the critical dates that he's tracking, so that you know, we have a better idea of what our numbers are going to look like. I'm going to, you know, we'll try to budget for the general fund budget. Right, you know, we'll be working on it right up until, you know, Tuesday, to try to give you as accurate a budget as I can make it on Tuesday. So it's some of this changes literally hour to hour. We have no idea right now what the state's looking to give us in terms of local aid. We have no idea. And the superintendent has no idea what the schools are looking at in terms of Chapter 70, and those are going to be enormous impacts to our budget. So what I'll give you on Tuesday is normally a pretty sound document in normal years when I give it to you on April 1st. Now it's going to be a very challenging document because we won't know. And it may go beyond June, but we won't know solid figures. So because of that, I've asked Tony to establish sort of benchmarks, and based on where we see revenue trends going, we can then, you know, back ourselves into a plan. And Dennis mentioned it before: worst case, you know, best case, and sort of middling case in order to you know, establish plans around and then budget accordingly. So by Tuesday, we'll be able to back into either the best case, middle case, or worst case. And the budget that you see on Tuesday will reflect sort of that best case, middle case, or worst case. So I guess that's really it. The focus for our budget, as I've mentioned before, it's essentially a top-down budget, and I've told the department heads this. In fact, this year, we were engaging the department heads as we do every year, perhaps a little more so this year, just to dig deeper into what their programming plans were going to be for FY21. That whole exercise has essentially been thrown out the window. Our priorities now are obviously health and safety, and we will budget according to make sure that we are preserving health and public safety as best we can under the circumstances. So that's our priority, and you know, that everything else sort of trickles down from that. Obviously, the support, you know, the internal support that we can provide public safety and health right now for FY21 is going to be critically important as well. So as is, you know, sort of on a third level, then, you know, the recovery effort and how we make sure that we're providing services to the community that are critically needed, certainly for the next fiscal year, and what's going to help us generate the economic engine that we're going to have to do on the local level. So there's sort of tiers of budgeting, as I mentioned, public safety, public health, obviously the most important. The support for those departments, you know, underneath that, and then you know, the future, you know, future public, you know, public services that are going to be required to help support the community, the social fabric of the community as we do get into a better recovery. So those are sort of the priorities in terms of budgeting, but all, again, within the context of worst case scenario for revenue, middle case, and then best case. So that gives you just sort of a very general context of how we're looking at presenting a budget on Tuesday. I guess
So, Bob Reese here. Michael, does that mean that you're going to send that information to Josh next Tuesday?
Yes, I'll release the budget to Ann Holmberg and to Josh at the same time, just recognizing that.
And then, Josh, you'll be sending that to us?
Yeah, as soon as I get it, I'll send it out to you guys.
So that is my plan. Again, it's, at the time I suggested deferring to May, the second meeting in May. I had anticipated that we'd have a lot more information. In reality, we have very little information other than what we can sort of extrapolate locally and try to calculate based on the figures that we know from last year's local revenues, trying to sort of extrapolate that into 2021. But we'll give you something, and as I say, the discussion, there'll probably be I will probably bring amendments to that budget as we get more information before your final vote. But that's sort of how I see this process working, at least through June.
Michael, just a quick process question. We need to publish the agenda, obviously in conformance with the open meeting law, such as it is now. I would hope that we publish whatever we have as a budget with the agenda, and that any amendments you bring then between when we publish the agenda and that will be done and passed out on an as-done basis, because I think it's important that we inform the public on the website and through the other means that they can get the agenda, what the budget's going to be, and not just have a placeholder. Thanks.
Point well taken, and we'll, as I mentioned, we'll share the budget as soon as we possibly can. It probably won't be on Friday when the agenda is posted. As I mentioned, we'll be working on it right up till midday Tuesday. So, but the point is well taken. We'll make sure to get it out and on the website and available.
It just feels not really kosher to me that someone can't look at the budget in the agenda and come up at citizens' comments before we start to discuss things to give their comments. So I'd urge you to, whatever you have, you got to try to post something. Even if it's the worst case, whatever it is, I'd rather have something than nothing that people can come up and give citizens comments to. Just my opinion. I don't know what Michael and what Dennis and Sean.
Yeah. But Tuesday night, there won't be a full presentation on the budget, or would it just be referred out? It's just an order that gets referred to the Finance and Budget, the Budget and Finance Committee, and then we meet like this again, and we go over it. And when will you have a formal presentation to the council on the budget, or the?
I'll be prepared to do a formal presentation, certainly the first meeting in June,
June, okay.
But you're right, the budget is submitted for first reading
Right.
at your Tuesday meeting. I'm happy to go over the highlights and just explain it. I think that's appropriate, and certainly in these, during this circumstance. And then I'll be much more prepared to probably, add more, either propose deletions or additions to the budget at your June meeting, and be thoroughly prepared to give a presentation on it.
Yeah, this is an interesting year because there is some interest. There has been a lot of interest lately from the constituents out there that they want to see the budget. unlike past years, what you submit at this time of the year is usually pretty firm, but not this year. So they got to understand that whatever they get on, whatever is put out in public, particularly if it's put out in public, the night of the day of June, the day of May 19th, it's a moving document still. And have you heard anything from your colleagues as far as what the state might do or is thinking of doing at the moment? No?
No, it's been radio silence in that regard, which is a little concerning. The governor and the legislature are creating all kinds of mechanisms, to delay town meeting, to go into a 1/12 spending, process, which tells me that we're not going to get a real solid figure from the state even for quite a while. So I'm a little concerned about that, but I do think it's important that we start the fiscal year with a budget. I don't want to go into a circumstance or into a scenario where we are doing a 1/12 because quite honestly, we might be overspending if we go into a 1/12 scenario. So that's my hope, is to get a budget to you, with as much solid footing as possible. But I guess with that, I'll.
Do we have to fund the regional before the 1st, or I believe they're going to have to go into a 1/12 anyway if they don't have funding by the 1st of June, right?
Correct. Yeah, correct. And I know we've had a brief conversation with the superintendent and the business manager about, the regional district. And I think they're pretty much in the same position we are. They don't have a whole lot of information. They don't have a whole lot of guidance even for the end of the fiscal year. Although they're not, their situation is a little different, obviously, but they don't have much guidance at all in that respect. So they are waiting for that from DESI.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
So I know you've already mentioned that doing the 1/12 is not preferred. But if we do get into a situation where there's a lot of variables still up in the air from the state that could have a tremendous impact to our budget, does it make sense as we get closer to maybe where we normally finalize the budget to prepare to maybe delay it for a month or two to get better insight? Because I don't think correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we're talking about 50 grand here, 100 grand here. I mean, we're talking some serious numbers, both plus and minus. So do we take a harder look at doing something that under normal course of business we wouldn't want to do at all?
I think the short answer is yes. I mean, Tony and I are going to look, as he mentioned, we look at this literally every day. And I think, if we get to the end of June, for instance, and we still have no, I mean, by the end of June, the state will give us some guidance, whether it's here's your local aid figure, or, we're going to not have local aid figures for you for another 3 months. Well, then we can make a decision certainly about moving to a 1/12 spending. That's certainly not our preference at this point, but we'll do what we have to do, if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yep. So I'll unless anybody has other questions, I'll certainly let Tony go over the sort of those revenue benchmarks that we've talked about a lot. Good.
You're on, Tony. You're on.
I'm on. I'll be
You're on.
How's that? Can you see?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, good. So where I've been, 4 weeks ago was, let's think in terms of the projected best case, and Michael and I have been talking about it. But what does that look like? The further we get from that 4 or 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, the more I think it's going to be very prudent that we get our minds wrapped around the projected worst case. I'll start off, that's just my own personal opinion. That's been my thought process now, because that then allows you to open up to, so what does that mean? And that's where the discussions that Michael referred to is where we're at. So projected worst case, up in the real estate tax area, nothing changes. So if you see the numbers across the board, the number here was FY20s, and now we have best case, moderate case, worst case, and those numbers don't change because those are your Proposition 2.5. That's your new growth, and those stay solid. It's the state numbers.
Tony, just
Yes.
for everyone's perhaps benefit, that line under real estate property taxes excess capacity,
Mm-hmm.
that is all the extra money we could put into the property tax. We're meaning we're taxing as high as we possibly can under Proposition 2.5, essentially, right?
That's correct.
you.
The mathematical equation rounds it to about $1,400 to $1,500 that we just can't squeeze it out. Just the system doesn't calculate that level of detail. It's literally that. We would get to zero if we could. So then you come down to Chapter 70 and the unrestricted in the state aid. Those are the ones that you're going to see change. Those other ones, veterans benefits is a reimbursement calculation. We don't know that there'll be any change to the reimbursement calculation because that's based on prior year's bills that the veterans agent has submitted to the state or their portion. They cut veterans benefits, then of course that number would change. The state pays a portion of the exemptions that I alluded to earlier, the exemptions that we give for veterans or other legal, other legal means, and in fact, they reimburse us a portion of that. The state-owned land is a state-owned land calculation. So those numbers came from the governors. They tend not to fluctuate much. As you can see from one year to the next, veterans benefits did go down, and we're using that across the board. So we're using a 2.5% reduction from our FY20. We're not using in the best case scenario. We're not using the governor's original proposed budget, which had a 2.8% increase. We're in fact just going back to FY20s, reducing it by 2.5 on the best case, 5% under moderate, and 10% under what we're calling the worst case scenario. And that's
So, Tony, can I interrupt you for a second?
please.
So the school district relies on state aid to a great extent as well, actually to a greater extent than the town does.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that, or the feature about that, I guess, is that when state aid drops 2.5% or 5 or 10% to the district,
Mm-hmm.
because the state aid is a very much larger percentage of the budget, the assessments to the town to even get back to whole for the district go up exponentially, right?
Yes, their Chapter 70 number is a huge component. This Chapter 70 for us is minor. It just refers to the out of district.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about but if we make the
Unrestricted.
assumption of,
Oh, yes.
that we're going to go down 2.5, if you make that assumption for the school district, that 2.5, what's state aid today? 35, 40% maybe, 30%, somewhere in that range.
Of their
right?
operating budget. Yep.
So now all of a sudden they're going down 2.5 points, but you have to make it up to the town's assessment on only 60 to 70% of the budget, which then is a 3 or 4% increase to the towns, right?
That's correct. It has it's exponential. So in our conversations over the last 5 or 6 days, I've been looking at what this 10% would mean. We move over to the local receipts.
Tony, on the state aid, so you're already acknowledging the fact that whatever the governor had in House 1 under unrestricted general government, that number isn't even in play here. You're going on what we received for fiscal 20, the 3.867. You're just taking 2% off that.
That's correct.
So what was the increase was really.
So the 2.5 is more like a 5.3, and the 10 is more like a 12.8.
So if the House 1 budget under unrestricted general aid stays as the governor proposed, there is no cut, that's about a $225,000 swing then.
Sure.
Okay, just pointing that out.
And Tony,
I'm well aware of that.
Okay, and that's just in the best case scenario. So.
Yeah, I mean, yes, Mr. Wood.
so on the new growth fund, you're assuming 850 or 816,000 in all three, right?
Yeah, that's not an assumption. That's a hard number.
That's a hard number. So that represents about $51 million in new building.
Oh yeah, we have a 415 new growth number deadline, and if Shelley didn't believe in that 815 number, that wouldn't be on this piece of paper.
Okay, very good. Thanks.
You're welcome. So now we move to the local receipts, and so if we look at best case as compared to last year's budget, I'm using a 10% reduction in motor vehicle excise, 50 in meals, and 50 in room, 10% in our penalties and interest on taxes, because initially I believe there's going to be no pay. So if there's no pay, especially in slow pay, no pay versus slow pay, you can actually have an initial reduction in your penalties and interest. Once the economy turns around, as we've seen in prior years, our penalties and interest number has gone through the roof. And that's because we were playing catch up and the taxpayer was paying catch up on bills that had been past due for quite some time. Down across the board in the other areas that are in the black, I'm not making any changes except for in the cannabis. We can move that number up to $150,000 because the receipts that have come in year to date have surpassed that. The DOR will allow us to use $150,000 in our budget next year. In the best case, I'm reducing licenses and permits by 25. So what we've done is created a group that is meeting weekly now. The CED, Community Economic Development, includes a building inspector and Jennifer Burke and Michael, myself, and we're constantly looking at what other projects that could be going before the planning board and or could be going before zoning, and we're watching them very closely. But that all said, we feel new permits are going to be slow in FY21, and we start with best case down 25%. And again, this is just your wiring, plumbing. We separate what we call recurring permits or licenses. Again, though, you could have a number of establishments that did have an alcohol license or had a convict license who go out of business, and therefore that number could go down. But I've level funded that in best case scenario for next year. Then I'll jump over to the worst case. Then we're looking at 20% in motor vehicles, 70% boat, 70% meals, 70% in excise, just 10, staying on 10 for the penalties and interest on taxes, 20 for the alcohol convict, because if we get to that point, we anticipate that we're in something more like a depression versus a recession, and businesses will, a number of our retail establishments won't function. And then, of course, building will drop at least 35%. So that's the worst case at this point in time, and the best case in comparison.
So Michael will have expenditure plan for us Tuesday night. When do you think you'll put together your final recommendations as far as what revenue we should use, or will you just match his?
I think we're working through that, Michael and I, and I think we have to have our numbers by the end of this week in order to get the documents put together for next week. Does that sound in line with your thinking, Michael?
Yep, correct.
So
Tony,
yeah. Go ahead. Under the worst case. Yep.
going.
Go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
So your worst case, Tony, how does that compare to 0809 and the dip we saw?
The motor vehicle excise is still above. We were as low as $2.2 million in motor vehicle excise. I'll look to that.
Well, no, I'm not saying the absolute number. I'm saying the decrease percentage-wise.
Oh,
I think worst case is worse than it was.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, that is accurate. Then we look at our transfers. This needs to be adjusted because the transfer from, let's say, the golf course for indirect costs is going to have to be looked at. Water and sewer should be fine. And that's the big part of it. Ambulance receipts are up. We don't anticipate that being impacted. And all these others are in fact funds that we have available now. So as you can see, in all three scenarios, those are our numbers. So the way to look at the revenue side is, as compared to 20, if we had best case, we'd have an additional 672,000. Now, no, when you're looking at percentages at the bottom line here, it's a little skewed. And that's sometimes I pull some numbers out, which can skew numbers for someone who's trying to correlate from one report to a next. Because up here, remember, we have debt service numbers, which are debt exclusion that has a funding source that goes right to an expenditure source. So just know that in looking from one year to another, especially in 20 to 21, any scenario, you can see that our excludable debt in FY20 was 632, and now it dropped to 280. But that money doesn't go into the operating budget. It only supports your debt service. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at these bottom line percentages. And then worst case, we're $134,000 below FY20's revenue.
Yeah, but we don't know our fixed costs, the health insurance and retirement increases will take care of that. I mean, we'll make that worse.
Well, yeah, yes,
Yeah.
at a high level, your contractual obligations, your pension costs, your health insurance costs moves that number significant.
That 134,000 is not a budget deficit. That's a revenue deficit.
That's
because we don't know the spending plan proposed yet. Right.
Yeah, that means is you have to be able to fund your budget $133,000 less than you funded in FY20. There's another way to look at it.
Okay.
And that's real dollars. That's not You're saying real dollars go down 133,000.
Correct.
Thank you.
And normally what we would see is an increase of, in total dollars, 1.4, $1.5 million.
Or to do it by percentages, you've generally said somewhere in the high 2% range, 2.7, 2.8, 2.9, and we're down 0.2, so it's about 3% off of where we need to be.
Yeah, I think one of the presentations that I did first out of the box was historical revenue growth from year to year when I came on board was 3.2. That included motor vehicle excise, some of your transfers, and your new growth, which is above your 2.5. And the historical average after the economic downturn was 3.2. But that also included a $2.8 million override. So you're,
Well, I think that I like your analysis on the local receipts. I don't like the numbers, but they are what they are. But I think that I'd like to see you proceed with being as conservative as you are on the local receipts, because I do think we're going to feel some pain on motor vehicle excise in fiscal 21. I think that's going to happen. Unless all of a sudden we get all these new cars in Bridgewater or, you know, additional vehicles. However, I'm a little bit, would ask you to be a little more flexible with state aid, simply because if we haven't heard anything out of Beacon Hill and towns are going forth with their budgets, I'd rather stabilize our budget with our reserves based on a cut in state aid than stabilize our budget from cuts in local receipts if we have to go forward. That's just my hunch on that. I think you got a handle on the property tax, state aid. When we had that those C cuts in January of 2006, I believe it was, when Romney was in office, we stabilized the budget with some reserves.
Dennis,
that's how we can make adjustments going forward. But that's just my 2 cents. Yes, Tim.
I'm confused by what you said about state aid versus local receipts. What were you trying to do there?
No, I think the projection sheet, page 2 of 3 on local, the motor vehicle excise, the 20% reduction, the boat excise. I think Tony's analysis on local receipts, I don't like the numbers, but I mean, I think that something's going to give at the local level as far as motor vehicle excise in fiscal 21. Something's going to give there. So I'd be more inclined to kind of agree with whatever best, moderate, or worst, maybe a mesh of all three of them for his local receipts as far as revenue, and absorb those cuts in our budget. But as far as state aid goes, I don't necessarily agree with cutting 2.5% from what we got in fiscal 20. Because we already know what they said we're going to get in fiscal 21, which could be a $225,000 swing if we get what they promised us.
so may I jump in for a second? Dennis.
Can I just clarify one
Sure.
thing, Tony, before you jump in? So,
Absolutely.
Dennis, you're suggesting going with the 3867, right? Which is no decrease, but it would be a decrease from House 1.
Yes.
Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood you. Thanks.
Right.
So Dennis, I think I hear it from a different perspective, and it makes sense to me. It's like the numbers we should be able to monitor and really wrap our arms around are our local receipts, right? We know our real estate, how that's going to play out. Those numbers are hard. if we go with the number that was, Tim and yourself just, kind of had a consensus on, then we can be prepared that if that number becomes something less, then you're in favor of balancing that shortfall with reserves. Did I hear that right?
I would on a one-time basis, unless
Yeah.
we see some changes in the local receipts.
Sure. Yeah.
Unless we see some, oh geez, people are buying cars or, something like, unless we see
We
that.
we can monitor that.
Right.
Mhm.
Can I add, because Tony actually mentioned me, I don't necessarily agree with that approach, Tony.
Okay.
I
Thank you.
understand it.
Yeah.
But what I think is, we have sold people, and you and Michael particularly have sold me on the fact that we are trying to build up our reserves to withstand a 2 to 3 year downturn like 08, 09.
Mm-hmm.
So I do not expect anyone to lose their job in this budget. I expect us to go forward as usual. I don't care how you figure out the numbers. If it's a 1 year dip, I understand you both said that it's a little bit worse than 08, 09. Get it, understand it. I'm not sure it's going to be a U. I'm hopeful it's going to be a V as far as this recession goes.
Yeah.
But I think for 2021, I would want to see business as usual based on everything we've told our unions, told our town council, told our partners in the school district. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Right. And I think also too that, I'll agree with Dennis's approach in regards to you never want to dip into reserves, but I think with a lot of work from Tony and a lot of work from Michael and things like that, we've had our auditors come in and tell us that we're on the upper echelon in regards to most of our reserves, not all of them. And that in this particular scenario, this is where I think you don't prefer to go into reserves, but we also can't stay steadfast on business as usual of building up when right now, for all intents and purposes, we're definitely in a recession, borderline on a depression. So I agree with you, Tim, in regards to for the next fiscal year, we want to keep this business as usual, but I also think that we have to be a little bit more, forgive the term, liberal around this upcoming fiscal year to use the reserves that we built up for this particular scenario. So I know it's a last case, but I think we've talked about pushing revenues in order to be able to fund, I'll just say some things on an ongoing basis. But I think that this is a stopgap, in my opinion, that we really need to seriously explore, hoping that we don't have to, but I wouldn't take that off the table either.
But Michael, for next week, without telling me what the details are, can you tell me what the details are? what kind of, I guess.
Well, hold on. What Dennis is saying is in 30 words or less, answer Dennis's question.
Are you going to be proposing a number close or at what the schools have requested from us in your budget? I guess,
So I think that was our original intent. I think when this started 8 weeks ago, we saw a way to commit, the 2.9 that we had originally committed, and we saw that would be doable. Based on some discussions we had with the superintendent last week, I don't know that that's going to be realistic. We had some discussions with Rainham as well. I don't know that that's going to be realistic. So I think the short answer is no. I certainly wouldn't commit to that at this point. But in terms of detail, I've already gone over my 30 words, but in terms of detail, I think, our first cut, we had, we've gone from one world to another world in the blink of an eye. So we've had open positions in our budget that we have been trying to fill and trying to fill and trying to fill for in some cases years. And we budget for those positions every year. Now, I guess we're in a position where we could probably now fill those jobs, but we're not. We're going to, those will be the first casualty in the budget. And that's not going to hurt anyone other than, some department heads that desperately need the help. But those are essentially the first casualties. And beyond that, everybody knows, that we're not going to be looking at huge expense increases. Everybody gets that. We've got a really good set of department heads who really understand. So thank goodness for that. But those are sort of the first levels. We talked about this actually yesterday at length. We're going to, for a year, we're putting, a lot of our projects. We've got a lot of projects in the works. We're putting most of those projects on hold. And we're going to continue with only the projects that we absolutely have to continue with. So there are a lot of things that'll be on hold for at least a year. And to the extent that those have an impact on the operating budget, those are what we're looking at.
Dennis.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes, Tim. Michael.
Yes.
I cannot stress enough in my mind that we have asked unions to take various increases and various contracts with the intent of building up surplus so that they can, and we all can survive through the bad times. 1 year of a bad time is a bad time, but that doesn't mean we cannot, in my mind, in good conscience, not have a budget that comes up to us next Tuesday that involves any layoff of town employees. That's just my opinion.
I agree. I agree, and I think that Mike's going to try to do that. But based on the numbers, Tim, I don't see, based on the revenue numbers that we saw, with worst case scenario, $133,000 less to work with, that we're not going to be able to balance the budget without using some reserves. I just don't see it.
Dennis,
Based on these numbers.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
Okay.
I'm saying that's why we built up the reserves.
We finally agree. We finally agree. It's time to adjourn.
Dennis, I agree with you too. I mean, if you look at the process, we started building reserves long before Michael and Tony got here. We started in 2011, with the 85% rule that I put together. So we've been building reserves for years. And, you've been in some of my budget and finance meetings where the rule is simple: no layoffs, no override. And so I think the funding right now can probably help us survive multiple years where we look kind of normal and try to achieve those goals. But I can't agree, I hope it's going to be a V-shaped recession.
Right.
All indicators right now that I'm watching say it's not. And so we have to be really thoughtful about how we use the reserves. And so I think next year, you're right. I think we should absolutely make sure that we're not, sacrificing any positions that are currently filled, and that would be one of the objectives, and using some of the reserves to backfill the lost revenue from local receipts and possibly from the state. But we need to also continue to look long-term, because I think the year after that may be just as difficult as next year.
Well, it also seems like where we've seen, and we're probably going to see, retirements. So part of the budget process and expense process is, unfortunately, you're not laying people off, but you may not be able to replace positions that someone has stepped away from. And they're going to have to understand that as well. And I know that's not a great message to deliver, but that's the reality of the fact right now. So to Michael's point, there have been positions in the budget for years that have never been filled that are going to have to go by the wayside for the foreseeable future. But then you're going to have staffing that may have to stay as is after retirements or people step away. I mean, that's a reality of the fact as well.
Does the finance committee have any questions regarding that? So we're going to get the budget Tuesday night. I propose another joint meeting Tuesday, May 26th. Does that work for you guys, Nathan, or?
Take a look at the calendar here. How about the rest of the group? Kathy, Julie, Susie, 26th?
The day
Works for
after,
me.
the day after
Kathy.
Memorial Day.
I think Eric had proposed that we actually have a finance committee meeting that night and plan for the joint meeting as well. So I think we already are getting that set up.
Okay, so we'll have a joint meeting on the 26th. This time, good, 6:30 start. Okay with everybody? Sean?
Yeah, well, as long as, the payroll protection program spends its money, I'm good.
I'm okay.
Yeah,
Any comments from the public? Anybody out there in the public that want to comment? I can't see if you're raising your hand, but if you start talking, we'll. Anybody from the public?
I think Josh has to recognize him since he's the host.
Josh, does anybody want to talk? Josh, has you seen anybody that want to talk?
I don't see anybody that's raising their hand right now.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn our Budget and Finance Committee meeting.
So moved. Second.
Second, Tim,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Dennis, yes. We're adjourned at 8:12.
All right, I'll ask for a motion from the Finance Committee.
Kathy, motion to adjourn.
Have a second.
Second, Julie.
Let me just do a quick roll call vote. Nathan,
Aye.
Susie,
Aye.
Bill,
yes.
Kathy,
Aye.
Julie.
Aye.
All right. I think we're all set.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Mike. We'll see you Tuesday.